inflicted by enslavement and post-emancipation and racial exclusionary policies.
Hello everyone, welcome to an all-new edition of Viral. I'm your host, as always, Kitty G's here. Glad you're here on Viral as we talk about reparations. Reparations has been the talk of the nation as many African Americans believe they are owed money from their slavery ancestors. Alright, join in that conversation using the hashtag Viral here. Man oh man, when we talk about reparations, do you believe that a whole African Americans shall be the right to get reparations for slavery ancestors? Well, here is a famous author who believes reparations are important. Watch this.
Enslavement reigned for 250 years on these shores. When it ended, this country could have extended its hallowed principles, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to all regardless of color. But America had other principles in mind. And so for a century after the Civil War, Black people were subjected to a relentless campaign of terror, a campaign that extended well into the lifetime of Majority Leader McConnell. It is tempting to divorce this modern campaign of terror, of plunder, from enslavement. But the logic of enslavement, of white supremacy, respects no such borders. And the god of bondage was lustful and begat many heirs, coup d'etats and convict leasing, vagrancy laws and debt peonage, redlining and racist GI bills, poll taxes and state-sponsored terrorism. We grant that Mr. McConnell was not alive for Appomattox, but he was alive for the electrocution of George Stinney. He was alive for the blinding of Isaac Woodward. He was alive to witness kleptocracy in his native Alabama and a regime premised on electoral theft. Majority Leader McConnell cited civil rights legislation yesterday, as well he should, because he was alive to witness the harassment, jailing, and betrayal of those responsible for that legislation by a government sworn to protect them. He was alive for the redlining of Chicago and the looting of Black homeowners of some $4 billion. Victims of that plunder are very much alive today. I am sure they'd love a word with the Majority Leader. What they know, what this committee must know, is that while emancipation deadbolted the door against the bandits of America, Jim Crow wedged the windows wide open. And that is the thing about Senator McConnell's something. It was 150 years ago, and it was right now. The typical Black family in this country has 1/10 the wealth of the typical white family. Black women die in childbirth at 4 times the rate of white women. And there is, of course, the shame of this land of the free, boasting the largest prison population on the planet, of which the descendants of the enslaved make up the largest share. The matter of reparations is one of making amends and direct redress, but it is also a question of citizenship. In H.R. 40, this body has a chance to both make good on its 2009 apology for enslavement and reject fair weather patriotism, to say that a nation is both its credits and its debits, that if Thomas Jefferson matters, so does Sally Hemings, that if D-Day matters, so does Black Wall Street, that if Valley Forge matters, so does Fort Pillow. Because the question really is not whether we will be tied to the somethings of our past, but whether we are courageous enough to be tied to the whole of them. Thank you.
Wow. He made his case that reparations are important because of what African Americans has went through and endured. He wants to take heed to that. Well, that didn't stop there, as actor Danny Glover offered his support for the cause. Watch this.
A national reparations policy is a moral, democratic, and economic imperative. I sit here as the great-grandson of a former slave, Mary Brown, who was freed by the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863. Despite much progress over the centuries, this hearing is yet another important step in the long and heroic struggle of African Americans to secure reparations for the damages inflicted by enslavement and post-emancipation and racial exclusionary policies.
Like after Glover fails, blacks should be getting their piece of the pie. But others, such as Senator Mitch McConnell, denounces reparations and brought up the nation was made up for them and for the blacks, that the election of Barack Obama, the nation's first African-American president, well, I don't know if that's a point to bring up, but, we're glad, some blacks are happy that Barack Obama did win the election to become president, and that's progress. But, some feel like they are owned and entitled to reparations. Well, here's a comment from New York Times columnist Charles Blow thinks about this whole situation. Watch this.
Obama has nothing to do with reparations. I mean, you can't look at what you may consider to be racial progress and say that that has something to do with whether or not we are going to repair the sin, whether or not we're going to deal with the harm that was actually done. Millions of people, black people, died, either enslaved or because they were enslaved or killed, right? We were a slave country for 100 years longer than we have now been a country free of slaves. This is not a thing that happened 150 years ago. This is a thing that happened for 250 years in America, right? And there's death, there's torture, there's terror. There's also 250 years of millions of people giving labor for which they were never compensated. It made America a rich country, and it made people in America very rich. And even if you're descended from somebody who was not a slave owner, the whole society benefited. If I was rich, I could build a school. I could build a hospital. I could donate to the local cultural institutions and events. It made the society richer. Everybody, other than the slaves, benefited from the institution of slavery. It has nothing to do with Barack Obama. It has nothing to do. Even he said, the Civil War. Yeah, half the country fought to keep slavery, and if they had won, we'd still have it, presumably. He says the Civil Rights Movement. Well, half the people in this country did not want that to happen, particularly in the South. People died to get that. I don't understand this ration. I think it's just this is kind of a self-delusion or something, or being intentionally obtuse.
Senator, can I get your take on that?
Well, I think being critical of Mitch McConnell for simply recognizing that America has made tremendous progress since the days of slavery is, I think, is pretty harsh. I don't think he meant anything other than the fact that progress has been made. To the point that Mr. Blow is making, yes, clearly slavery is the original sin of America, and it did occur for a couple of hundred years, and it caused horrific harm. But it still was 150 years ago, and so that's just a fact. I think the comments that he's making are very compelling comments, and maybe 150 years ago, the Congress should have had a hearing on this and actually seriously considered whether there was something that should have been done to deal with the harm that had occurred to the people who actually experienced the harm. But it's really curious to me, because you said it, John. This is the first hearing we've had on this issue in the history of the Congress. Why now? What's going on in the discourse in America that we now look back for something that clearly was horrific? Your comments, Charles, were riveting. But why now? Why are we having this conversation now? What's going on politically within the Democratic Party? Because that's where this is emanating from. That this is an issue now that has some sense of urgency, and that I think is the question that needs to be answered.
Let me say this about that. There's two problems with that, right? People keep saying it was 150 years ago. No, it didn't. We kept a kind of quasi-slavery long after actual slavery was eliminated, right? We built into the 13th Amendment the clause that says you cannot be forced to give involuntary labor unless you are convicted of a crime, which is a backdoor that allowed Southern states to basically accuse Black people, even children, of all sorts of crimes, and to put them in a system that we'll call convict leasing, where they would lease out these bodies, again, free labor, to farmers, to industry, to anybody. This happened until the 1930s, right? We allowed Reconstruction to fail. And we pulled federal troops out of the South. We knew exactly what was going to happen when that happened. And right after it did, states, starting with Mississippi in 1890, rush in, call constitutional conventions, and they are not shy about it at all. They say, we are here to write white supremacy into the DNA of these states. And every Southern state then follows Mississippi, and they write white supremacy. Those constitutions, they've never had new constitutional conventions, and those laws exist until the 1960s. The idea that we're just talking about chattel slavery is false. The idea that all of the injury was happened 150 years ago is false. And we have to get our heads around what we did and how much we benefited from that, and how much of those tax dollars that we had, that Black people were paying in the system, were not being used for them at all. Their schools were underfunded. Their neighborhoods were I grew up in one of these segregated neighborhoods. I watched my neighbor's house burn down because there was one fire hydrant in the entire Black neighborhood, and by the time they got that water from that fire hydrant, that house had burned to the ground.
All right, we need to talk more about this. What we're going to do, Senator Central.
All right. Now with Charles Blow saying, hey, the same thing Dan Glover and the author were saying about reparations. You know, reparations could make a difference, could make a possibility for many African Americans. And some just don't agree with that. Well, we turn our attention to the ones who believe reparations was yesterday's news, with people such as Billoriley with his opinion.
But now the far left wants payments to African Americans. They said only 8% of whites support that. 58% of African Americans say, yeah, we're entitled to payments. However, the Supreme Court already ruled on this in 1969. And on my radio program, the O'Reilly Update, which we post every day for you on BillO'Reilly.com, I said this today. Go. In 1969, the Supreme Court ruled 7-3 that historical injustice does not allow for government payments. The case was Richmond v. the J.A. Croson Company, where the Virginia capital city was awarding minority companies contracts based on racial quotas designed to make up for past racial injustice. The city was sued. In its decision, the court wrote, quote, to accept Richmond's claim that societal discrimination alone can serve as rigid preferences would be to open the door to competing claims for remedial relief for every disadvantaged group, unquote. In other words, the grievance demands would never end. And just today, Elizabeth Warren said gays should get reparations. And what about Native Americans? And what about Asians who built the railroads and were exploited in the 19th century? So the Supreme Court already ruled on this. And anybody putting forth legislation has got to know that. So they do it for political reasons, to gin up the African American vote and to show everybody how virtuous they are.
Bill O'Reilly, with his opinion, saying that, you know, reparations is a wealth gain. And, you know, we can't forget the other folks, Diamondandsilk, who made a comment as well.
Think about all the white Americans' fathers in the North that died freeing the slaves.
That's
What,
right.
Are they entitled to anything?
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's going to make things worse, not better. How do you ladies see it?
Well, it is going to make things worse. You have to understand that these Black elitists up there in Congress are trying to exploit the plight of Black people
Yep.
and exploit the pain of our ancestors. That's number one. And number two, they want to dissect history and cherry pick what they can use and what they can't use. But remember, it was the Black African that sold Black people into slavery.
That's right.
So they were the ones that started it. And when we talk about reparations, so I have a history. We have ancestors that were slaves. So do my taxpayer dollars have to pay into the reparations? Are you going to make all white people pay for the reparations? What about the Black people that own slaves?
That's right.
You know, when I hear them say that they want to start a committee or a commission to study slavery, all these Black elitists want to do is rip off taxpayers' dollars is what they're trying to do, and not going to do anything. I am not for reparations. We were all dealt the same hand when we got here. Let's start uniting us based on the fact that we are Americans instead of them constantly dividing us based on the fact that of our race. I don't like that.
It's all a scam, Jesse. It's all a scheme and another scam, just like the projects. This is just another project to take and exploit Black people, and that's all it is.
And appease them, and when they know darn well that Black people ain't gonna be getting no money.
That's right.
We don't need your handouts. You know what, Jesse? They can keep their handouts.
That's right.
Because they don't get to buy my silence. We will never let the Democrat Party forget that they are the party of KKK, the party of Jim Crow, the party of segregation.
That's right.
All of the stuff that the atrocities that have been bestowed on Black people, the Democratic Party have done it. Even those Black elitists sitting up there have gone along with it.
That's right. It's amazing how the ladies up there are concerned about the wealth gap. But when you have Diamond and Silk that was right up there on the hill, and you had Sheila Jackson concerned about our wealth as Black women, about a measly $1,000-some as Black women. I think it's a shame. I think they need to be called out. And I think that Black people need to wake up and stop being used like a tool.
That's right.
All right. Well, listen, we had a lot of other topics slated to go, but you guys were so fired up about the reparations. We just let it go. And again, I kind of agree with you. I mean, you're re-victimizing people psychologically by, forcing them to take money. And you know what? When you have a commission in this country, that's just a dead end zone. Nothing ever happens when there's a commission. I think the Democrats are just creating a commission to make it look like they're trying to do something, but they're never going to do it. All right. Diamond and Silk on the road because the Chit Chat tour is going all across the country. Ladies, thank you guys very much.
Diamond and Silk and Billoriley are pure opponents of reparations and don't believe that reparations are yesterday's news and shouldn't be coming into the play right now in the United States because they believe it's like a wealth thing and social economic thing with the background and stuff like that. All right. At the end of the day, reparations is a hot topic of discussion that you be the judge and see what the outcome can be. So, hey, this is a conversation term. You tell us what you think about this reparation. Should African Americans be given the right to reparations, or should they or it was yesterday's news? It just wasn't the case to be and wasn't meant to be. Thank you all for watching this week's edition of Viral. I've been your host, Kenny Dixon, and so long, and we'll see you next time here on Viral.